Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. The Pybus Public Market is pleased to offer a series of unique and fun classes for the Wenatchee Valley community. Classes are taught by local volunteers with an interest and aptitude in the subjects that they teach.
So my name's Carrie Walker. I've been in the Wenatchee Valley area for about 3 years now. My background is in healthcare for the last 25 years. First as an occupational therapist, working as a clinician, primarily with the elderly. I moved into healthcare administration, did also some what is called liaison work, where I worked in between acute care hospitals and post-acute care settings. And when I moved to Wenatchee, I wanted to basically fill a need that was here. I have worked in multiple markets where there are what are called geriatric care managers that provide independent, kind of driven care for private individuals, where you're not working for a healthcare system, you're not working for a health insurance company, you're typically working just for the aging individual. There wasn't anyone providing that service here when I moved here, so I went back to school to receive my graduate certificate in geriatric care management and opened up a practice in January. So I am new to the practice specific, but 25 years of working with the elderly, and that's how I have a little bit of knowledge in kind of what are the warning signs, what we see happening with elderly individuals, and kind of ways as family members and friends and neighbors that we can kind of keep an eye on everybody, and if they need extra help, how we find that help for them. So what I do want to tell you is that tonight, this is a really kind of high-level overview of some real general issues to look at. Obviously, every family, every case, every individual has very, very specific issues that affect what's happening in everyone's environment very, very differently. So as we go through this, again, feel free to kind of ask questions or give input into each of these. So we talked about kind of a little bit about what brought some of you here. Is anyone currently providing care to a family member at this time? Not directly. Okay. All right. So this is the first thing that I like to talk about, is looking at what the changes are. So you really want to look at what was the function today versus what was it last year versus what was it 5 years ago versus what was it when they were younger. So I kind of try and explain this is, if you had someone, say a family member that's always sort of been an absent-minded professor type that doesn't really remember a lot of things, it's not necessarily a sign of a medical change or a sign of, dementia or things like that if that behavior is consistent or stays the same. It's when we start seeing significant changes in what previous personality was, previous mood levels were, previous function levels were. That's what we're looking for. So the first area of changes that we can look at are possible medical problems. So when you're looking at medical problems, that can mean anything from, an onset of a disease, a progression of a disease, medication side effects, which are lengthy. A lot of times we look at medications, and the first thing we need to do is, one, how many are they on? How are the side effects? How are the medications interacting with each other? So that can be a huge sign of changes. It could be a reason because of medications a lot of times. A lot of times we also see problems just because of a basic in hearing function or vision function. When we're seeing changes in hearing loss or vision loss, that can turn into presenting like a lot of different things. The other piece we start seeing is looking at changes could indicate memory problems. So if you're looking at short-term memory changes, they could reflect a possible disease onset like dementia or Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, where patients or people are having smaller strokes. But what it could also be indicative of is just something as simple as dehydration. So when you're looking at, again, medication side effects, dehydration, and possibly when you start seeing memory problems too, a lot of times that could also be indicative of depression. If they haven't had depression in the past, that could be something that's happening now because of environmental factors, losses of spouse, losses of friends, and changes in the environment that they live in. The other one too is changes could indicate related to, again, the concept of social isolation. This could either be a sign of depression or it could be a symptom of depression. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. People could be developing depression and that creates social isolation, or their environment creates social isolation, which then can create effects of depression. The other thing you want to look at with social isolation is what are the changes in ability. A lot of times people start to socially isolate themselves because they're no longer able to hold the same conversation that they had before or to engage with their friends in the same way. And instead of dealing with kind of trying to figure out the semantics of a social situation, they would rather just choose to withdraw from it so that they don't have to really kind of talk about their deficits or feel like they need to present them or share them with other people. So it's a little bit easier sometimes to hide behind that. The big changes too could look at safety concerns. So safety concerns are a big one. How many of you here know what the risk factors are for falls? The fact of looking at simple things as replacing light bulbs so people can see, removing throw rugs so that you get rid of fall risk, making sure that thresholds in between rooms are smooth. Things like that are very small things we can change to really look at what those safety issues are of aging individuals at home. Big disclaimer, I'm not a physician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to diagnose anybody tonight or anybody's family or friends. These are all just ideas that every individual is different. And again, these are just kind of overview issues of what we're going to look at tonight. Number one thing we're going to look at is changes in eating. So has anybody noticed that with any of the individuals that they are spending time with or have questions about? I see a couple of nods. So the big thing with this is looking at either a loss of weight or gaining of weight, the changes in appetite, and missing meals. This can point to a lot of different things. It can point to dental problems. It can point to arthritis. It can point to problems with just getting food ready, how to execute a meal, how to plan a meal, how to go to the grocery store, get what you need, and make the meal. That takes a lot of executive functioning, and if they're struggling with that at all, you start seeing a decrease in dependence in that.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Is your vehicle in need of a quick oil change or tune-up before hitting the road this summer? Stop by Quick Lube and Tune, the home of the good guys at 610 South Wenatchee Avenue.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Changes in cleanliness. This is also one that I think is one of the first things that people kind of start to notice. Again, this is looking at those previous behaviors. If someone was always had a messy household, was never one that really liked to comb their hair too much, or their outfits didn't match too much. This is not one that you're going to start paying attention to right away. But if you have someone that's always had a clean house, has always managed themselves, groomed themselves really nicely and neatly, and you start to see that changing, that's when, again, we're looking at that could be issues of medical problems, it could be issues with side effects of medication, it could be changes in diagnosis, depression. A lot of different things lead to this symptom. Skin changes is another big one. This one, what you can look for are things like burns, unexplained cuts and bruises, looking at sores on feet, sores anywhere else, different types of lesions on their body. A lot of these things can be associated with sensory regulation, not recognizing if the water's too hot in their house. So, and getting burns just because of water, or getting burns on the stove while doing meal preparation because maybe their motor planning isn't fast enough now that their hand actually gets burnt as opposed to pulling it off the stove. The other thing is the unexplained cuts and bruises could be things like general weakness, falls that they're not talking to you about. They're not saying that maybe they've had a couple of falls, but now they have unexplained bruise on their arm, maybe a cut on their leg. And then the other one is just to look at possible lesions. When you see different types of skin lesions showing up, that can be either signs of an onset of a different type of disease, onset of a type of cancer. It could be a side effect of medication. So those are things to look at as well. Changes in ability to move around. This is a big one. So this is the one that a lot of times I think because physically it's easy to see, and again the cleanliness one too, is it's easy for people to see. It's a very concrete thing to observe when you see someone's gait or their balance decreasing, them becoming more unsteady, seeing them act a little dizzy, really slow from getting up to their chair to standing, and that transition from a chair to standing to in and out of the bathroom, back and forth from the dining room, all of a sudden that looking really difficult and it taking a lot more time is, again, one of those things that we need to look out for. When getting around and looking at issues such as falls, falls is one of those #1 reasons we're trying to avoid that when we have individuals either what I would call aging in place, aging in their own home environment, staying with families, and or even looking at if they are in some sort of a facility or institution setting of some sort. Decreasing risks of falls is a big deal. Why do you think that's a big deal? Anybody? I'm going to call on you. Shauna, why would risk of falls be a big deal?
Broken bones, obviously, and then as people are aging, the rehab is more difficult, especially if they have dementia, because they're not able to follow the PT protocol, so falling is not good.
Falling is not good. Falling also, I did not write the statistic down in front of me.
And they can hit their head.
Right, exactly. Falling also leads, Oh, and also they could hit their head. Thank you, Katja.
Oh, the whole thing.
Yeah. Yes, Mike.
Well, another thing is that my mom is on a blood thinner.
Yeah.
And so if she falls, she's a walker. If she falls and gets a bruise, it could be serious.
Yeah. I was going to say, anyone that is on a blood thinner, that's a really good point, Mike, thank you, is their risk of falling, and because of the blood thinner, it's much more difficult to control the bleeding with a wound, and it's much more difficult to heal from it. So that's also an issue. The other issue is when we're looking at, say, the ages of 75 and above, when we are seeing multiple medical diagnosis on multiple medications, a fall occurs. If a fracture occurs, the percentage of death within the next 12 to 24 months is significant. It changes quality of life, it creates social isolation, it can create depression, it creates more medications, which creates side effects. It is a very much a snowball effect. So the preventing falls is a big deal. So making sure that you're really looking at those changes in ability to move around is a big sign if you're seeing changes with someone. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, before I move on.
So when you're talking about the unsteady gait, I know some of the dementias talk about the shuffling. So sometimes we look at how people change from walking, like how they normally walk. Is that part of what you're talking about with the unsteady gait?
That is a change. So what Shauna was saying is sometimes you start to see more of a shuffling gait as opposed to a steady gait. That can be related to a lot of different things. It can be related to different diseases. It could be related to medications. But that shuffling gait does really increase the fall risk as well. When you don't have that clearance of one foot to the next of the ground, if you're doing it more of the shuffling, that does create an increased fall risk. But it can be caused by several different things.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Stay up to date with what's happening in North Central Washington. Go to the NCW Life Community Calendar at ncwlife.com.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
The next one we're going to look at, this is a hot topic, changes in driving. Things to look for are just dents and scratches in the car. If you have the opportunity to drive with a family member, people honking at them, you seeing changes in their ability to process a lot of information at one time, which driving requires that. Looking at possibility of having tickets, possibility of having accidents. The issue with driving is, again, very psychologically tied to that idea of independence. We're in America, we love our cars, we love what it says about independence, we can't wait to get a driver's license when we're 16, and we're sure as heck not going to hand away our driver's license when someone that's a young whippersnapper comes in and tells us that you can't drive anymore. People do not like to hand away their keys. So this is a big deal to talk about with family members in a very nuanced way. There are courses called Driving After 55 that it's the American Automobile Association provides, so you can actually just encourage a family member to take a course. Yes?
Statistics have shown that since roundabouts have come about, a lot of people have quit driving because they're so confusing for elderly.
Did you guys hear that? As roundabouts have come about, people have quit driving because they're so confusing. Yeah. All right, that's one way to take care of that issue. Yeah, more roundabouts in. That'll solve that. My mom feels the same way about roundabouts. The other thing is at Confluence Health, their occupational therapy department here in Wenatchee does offer driving evaluations. So you can, if there's, usually what I would attempt to do is say, great, if you think you're really good at driving, let's just go get the driving evaluation done and we'll be done with it. A lot of those times, the occupational therapy evaluation can still say, this person's appropriate to drive, but we need to put these measures in place or trainings in place to make it safer. Sometimes that's not the case. Then the discussion becomes figuring out how to set up alternative forms of transportation to solve that problem. And that's different in every community. And I know our community right now is working very hard, Link Transport and a lot of other people combined in that community. We have a whole mobility council that's working together in the Chelan-Douglas County area right now to try and increase some of our transport options in the area. Changes around money. This is one that a lot of times, again, another one that we see first. Things like giving away all their money to somebody that called them because they felt like $10,000 was a good idea to give away because the person on the phone said they really needed it. Things like that. We're seeing lots and lots of increased fraud with aging individuals lately. So being able to notice the changes around money, about not paying bills, maybe paying them twice, losing money, or again, having those unusual purchases. If you've always had someone that likes to spend money on HGTV, or what's the shopping network? Okay. QVC, thank you. Right, so like my mom, if I notice her spending lots of money on QVC in 10 years, that's going to be the same exact thing as it is today. So that is not a change in behavior. It's just what she likes to do. But if you do start seeing also the unusual purchases, but then the unwillingness to talk about it. Like they don't want to have the conversation with you about money because having that conversation may reveal some difficulties that they're having. In my organization, I work with a lot of different care managers across the country, and one of the things we are in every market in every city across the country, we're seeing a lot more fraud issues coming up, either over the phone, over the computer, etc. And it is unfortunate, but at the same time, we all kind of need to be aware of that as well, because the interesting part of it is that these folks that are presenting the scams or fraud are very, very, very good at identifying individuals in our community that have cognitive decline. In fact, they're so good at it, we should hire them because they identify people that are having cognitive decline prior to family members, healthcare systems, physicians. The people that are developing the scams seem to be able to find them before the rest of us do. So somehow, we need to start paying attention to those things too. The next one is looking at mood and behavior changes. Are you seeing increased agitation, increased paranoia, being unusually loud, unusually irritable, or any type of what would be considered an inappropriate behavior that wasn't there before? So when we're looking at unusually loud, a lot of times that can mean changes in hearing, but it can also mean depression. So these are little things to look at. If you're looking at unusually irritable, it can be an indicator of pain. It can be an indicator of memory problems. It can be an indicator of depression. And then also when we're looking at inappropriate behavior, such things as new or different types of relationships that they've never had before, overutilization, say, of the telephone. Say mom used to call once every 3 days and now she calls you 6 times every night after 8 o'clock. That's a change in behavior. We talked about this one a little bit earlier too. Withdrawal of life looks more like just a loss of interest in the activities that they've been engaged with before. Kind of the mood or tone of hopelessness, where when you're talking about trying to get them engaged and that initiation of engagement feels or appears hopeless. If you're seeing changes in crying, again, irritability, and then talks about suicide. So that is something that we need to take very seriously as well. One of those things that if someone is actually presenting that and talking about possible suicide, they've probably been thinking about it for a while, and so it's something that we need to take very seriously and intervene. There are a lot of resources in the area that can address that in a lot of communities, but that's something, if that's a red flag, that's something to get somebody in to help you with that immediately. A lot of depression in the elderly is extremely underreported. Underreported, undertreated, assessed, and a lot of those things can be effects of changes in nutrition. It can be effects of sleep. It can be effects of just lack of community engagement, and also just personal relationships. Again, as we age, those loss of our relationships, either a loss of a spouse, a loss of family being close to us, a loss of friends, and again, as we retire and move into a realm of our lives where work is not the primary thing, those building of relationships sometimes, for some people, can become much harder, and it becomes much more difficult to create that informal support system around you. Yeah. No, yes, Shauna, yes.
When you talk about suicide too, sometimes it seems like they'll say things that are really general that you might miss. Kind of like, what's the point of being here? I'm kind of done with this. It's like really vague.
Vague, yeah.
Right.
Did you guys hear that? So Shauna was saying that sometimes the talk of suicide can be very vague language, like, I don't feel like being here anymore. I don't know what the point is, you know. So, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just like that. Because they don't often say, I want to kill myself.
Right.
They have a real subtle way of putting it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So the other thing is just looking at the new signs of forgetfulness. So when we look at the new signs of forgetfulness, we're just looking at little things like unopened mail, piling of newspapers, not filling prescriptions, missing appointments, just not remembering conversations that they've had with you, misplacing objects. So those are all things that we would want to look for. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that someone has Alzheimer's if there are these pieces in here. So I'm going to pull out a list here that Alzheimer's Association gives us that's like the what would dementia look like versus what is typical. So I'll grab that next. The other thing we're looking at is just look for changes in reasoning and memory. So looking at if they're asking questions over and over and over again. If they're having a hard time completing really familiar tasks that you've always seen them be able to do and now it's difficult, like they can initiate it but they can't seem to finish the sequence of something. Not recognizing a familiar place. Not so much their home, but say, you know, say they come to PybusU University every Saturday night for dinner, and then on the way to dinner one Saturday, they don't really know where you're going. That would be a sign of memory changes. Problems following conversations, like so being able to track what's actually occurring in a conversation with one person or within a group of people. So as you see them being able to converse and track what's happening and respond appropriately as those things change, that can also be a sign of reasoning and memory changes. And then the other one is just looking at poor judgment. Now, this is one that I always am a little careful with because everyone has the right to make really poor decisions. And sometimes we like to, as family members, we know what's best for mom, we know what's best for dad. That decision's a terrible decision. They shouldn't be doing that, so they probably have dementia. That could be the case. What could also be the case is that sometimes you might just not like the decisions they're making, and it may appear to be poor judgment, but until someone is deemed to not have the capacity to make their own decisions, they have every right to make as many poor decisions as they want. So we work on that a lot when I work with family members. That's a tough one to swallow sometimes.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Have a fun video you'd like to see featured on NCW Life? Email us at newsphotos@ncwlife.com.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
To go back to your point, the I do that every day forgetfulness. So the Alzheimer's Association has this great little list. It's Know the 10 Signs. It talks about little ways that, like, things that you would notice that would be a kind of a sign of Alzheimer's versus a sign of just kind of typically, I forgot that. So I'm just going to go over that a little bit, and if anybody wants this, then I can send it to you via email. And just as a heads up, I do have a sign-in sheet back there. If anything comes up over the presentation that you're like, I really wanted more information on that, you can just put your name down, what information you want, and I'll try and find it for you. Okay, so know the 10 signs. Memory loss that disrupts daily life. So when we're talking about a patient with dementia, the signs that we're looking for is maybe a common sign is in the early stages is forgetting recently learned information, or forgetting important dates or events, asking the same information over and over again, or on really starting that you see them relying on memory aids more than they did before. So what's typical? Typical is sometimes forgetting names or appointments, but you remember them later on. Okay. One of the second signs is challenges in planning or solving problems. So you may see that developing or following a plan, working with numbers becomes difficult, having trouble with a familiar recipe, keeping track of monthly bills, or difficulty concentrating longer to do things that they were able to do before. What's more typical is just kind of making occasional errors on a checkbook, but then being able to go back and fix it, or on your online account, because none of us really have checkbooks anymore.
Except the elderly.
Yes, exactly. Difficulty completing familiar tasks at home, at work, or leisure or recreational activities. So a lot of times when you're looking at someone that may be developing dementia, they may have a hard time completing those simple daily tasks, such as driving to a particular location, managing a budget, remembering the rules of a card game. What's typical is needing occasional help, like setting your microwave or your VCR or your DVR or things like that, but then being able to ask for help and get it and kind of remembering how to do it. One of the other things is having confusion with time or place. So if you're looking at signs of dementia, changes in cognition, they can lose track of dates, seasons, and passage of time. What would be more typical is just getting confused about what day of the week it is, but then realizing later on that you know what day of the week it is. Like, all day today, I thought it was Wednesday, but I actually know it's Tuesday because I'm here at Pybus. But that seems to be a struggle of mine today. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. Again, sometimes having vision problems is a sign of an onset of dementia and or Alzheimer's of some sort. They may have difficult reading, judging distance, determining color or contrast, and then also visual perceptual tasks. So, such as an example, like passing a mirror and not realizing it's you, but thinking it's someone else in the room. Typical would be more of just changes in your eyesight, such as cataracts, or if you, for some reason, have a diagnosis of macular degeneration, or just the ability to require like an increase in your reading glasses prescription. That would be more of a typical visual change. One of the other things to look at is new problems with words in speaking or writing. May have trouble following or joining into a conversation, may stop in the middle of the conversation and not know what the conversation is about. What would be more typical would just be like having trouble finding the right word. So you're just trying to get that one word in that conversation, you just can't get it. That's fairly typical. Another thing to look for is just misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. So someone that may be having signs of cognitive decline is putting things in unusual places. So the good one for me, the example of this all the time is like forgetting where you put your keys. Like you come in, set your purse down, you know where your keys are, they might be on the counter. That's fairly typical, to kind of lose your keys and then be able to retrace and find them. What's not typical is putting your keys in the freezer, is then going back and finding them. So that's always one I kind of try and use as an example of like kind of losing them and misplacing them on the counter versus actually putting them in your freezer are two different things. Decreased or poor judgment. A lot of times the changes in judgment or decision making can be with things such as grooming. It can be things with money management, whereas the typical thing would be more just making those bad decisions from time to time. Looking at withdrawal from work or social activities, they may remove themselves from hobbies, social activities, work projects, keeping up with a sports team, hobby, family activities. Again, choosing that withdrawal and social isolation because it's more difficult to participate. What would be typical is just kind of feeling like you're tired some days and not really wanting to keep up with your social obligations. That's a little different. And then the last one here is just, again, looking at those changes in mood and personality. Is that you can see changes with confusion, suspicion, depression, fear, anxiety. Those can be when you take someone out of their comfort zone and it very easily upsets them. Whereas what would be more typical would be just becoming irritable when your routine gets disrupted, which a lot of times that can happen.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Get the fastest internet available in North Central Washington by switching to LocalTel and get speeds up to 1,000 meg. Call 888-8888 today or go online to localtel.net.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
So this is the other thing. Don't necessarily jump to conclusions. So you may sit here and be like, well, my mom's got all those. I better go to the doctor. So that may or may not be the case. If you do see some warning signs, the best thing to do is just start the conversation. Start the conversation. Mom, Dad, I noticed this. Are you noticing this? Do you want any help? So that's the best way to kind of get in there. The other thing is safety is important, and we all want to keep our family members safe, but we also want to make sure that we are looking at issues of quality of life and autonomy. Again, everybody gets the right to make poor decisions if they feel like it. And it's difficult to feel like we can allow that, or what I should say is really accept that. Is the best way to do it is to try and collaborate with our family members and figure out what it is that they feel like they need and how we can facilitate that. A lot of times it does take somewhat of a professional to help with some sort of an assessment. What I also like to look at when you're looking at feedback is don't forget about those informal support systems. Who are the friends? Who are the neighbors? Are they seeing changes? How are they providing support? We don't necessarily always need a physician to tell us that something's changed with Mom. A lot of times it's, the person that drops off the groceries, or it's the person that, has delivered a pizza, or whatever that person may be. It might be the person that mows their lawn is like, wow, she didn't look that great this week. We really need to pay attention to those informal support systems and use the information from those systems and see how we can do that to help. If more help is needed, there are lots of different ways to go about it. You can go in and have a physician do a formal assessment. You can hire a care manager. You can have in-home care. You can look at independent care providers. You can look at agency providers. We have several agencies in the Valley that provide home health care. You can look at home health where you're looking at more medical, if you need nursing services, if you need physical therapy to work on gait and strength and balance, if you need occupational therapy to look at a home environment safety assessment to figure out how you could update the house to make it safer for someone. This is part of my presentation, but we don't have an adult day center at this time in Wenatchee, but we do have long-term care facilities. But I think a lot of times people think, if I need support, that means my mom's either living at home or she's going to a nursing home. There are a lot of things in between. Yeah.
What's an adult day center?
Adult day center is basically a facility that you would drop an aging individual off at to have activities during the day. Say a mom lived at home with you, but they can't be at home on their own. So they go into a care center during the day, and then you just come pick them up at 5. So the best comparison to say is it's like daycare for your kids, but it's an adult day center for adults with appropriate level activities for adults. Other things to look at through the Area Agency on Aging is respite programs, family caregiver support programs, looking at the senior center programs that are here in order to get people, again, back engaged in activities, being around a network of people that it's a good way to kind of provide a structured social environment if someone's having a difficult time setting one up themselves. And then the other thing to do is just look at other options for transport, and there are other options for that in the community too. What you want to put together in trying to figure out how to provide help is getting to figure out the pieces of what medically is happening with someone, what's going on with them cognitively, what does their memory look like, what are we looking at psychosocial skills, how are we looking at the support system, how are coping skills, what does the home safety look like, can we make adaptations in order to facilitate independence, what does their mobility look like, how do we put things in place to prevent a fall. What does their personal care look like? Would they need help? How do we put that together? Looking at the financial piece, how do we help manage that? Does a family member need to take that over? Is there a possibility of utilizing a fiduciary to assist with that? And then the driving piece of looking at, is that safe? How do we facilitate evaluating that? And then how do we facilitate a communication with family members to move towards a safer option?
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Are you wanting high-speed internet but don't have access to PUD fiber? Try Sky-Fi high-speed wireless internet from LocalTel. Call 888-8888 today. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
With those pieces, as you can put those pieces together, you can come up with a care plan, or what I would really just call a roadmap. So a care plan is a nice medical chart term for putting together all of the pieces that you would need for your parent, but really it's just a roadmap. It's to figure out what are the pieces that where are our strengths, and where are the pieces where we really need help. Looking at all of those issues, kind of the pieces of the puzzle from the last slide, and then how do you move forward with that? And not only what do we need today, but what do we need 6 months from now? What do we need maybe a year from now, depending on what disease prognosis is there, what progression we're looking at sometimes for cognitive changes or other types of diseases, and how do we anticipate what the needs are coming up down the road. Again, the idea is to focus on maintaining quality of life. We want to make sure that there's meaningful activities and easy to accomplish changes. The other idea you want to figure out too is how any type of roadmap or care plan fits the individual financially. When I work with people, I direct people a lot of different directions for services. What I always want to say is you should never be talking to someone who puts together what I call a Jaguar care plan when you're on a Hyundai budget. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So you want to make sure that also looking at what it best fits the individual. That's all I have thus far. Any questions?
What about a memory baseline assessment? Or is it smart if you're concerned about memory changes to somehow get a memory test now?
Yes. Did you guys hear that?
No.
So the question was, Is it a good idea to get a memory baseline assessment? I would say yes. If you're worried about memory and you think that it may already be changing, I would certainly have that conversation with the individual, see if the next time they go into the physician, they can do, there's lots of different cognitive evaluations, but they can do short ones that are called like a mini mental and an MMSE. There are other ones that are much lengthier that physicians can do or care managers can do, but that one's a real simple one. You can pull it up online. It's called the mini mental status examination. It's 20 questions. And that's one of those things that you can use, like where are they at today? And then if you think, oh, I've seen some changes, you can do it again a year later and see if anything has changed, if there's been a decline. Any other questions? Mini mental status examination, or the MMSE. It's usually given by a professional, but I've had many family members that I've talked to that have sat down and done the mini mental with family members. So did you guys hear that? He asked, once you identify the problem, then how do you get either your aging individual that you're working with to get engaged with solving that problem? That is going to be different for each and every single person. So I think it really depends on tying it into what's meaningful and purposeful for them. So say like, oh gosh, Mom, you're super unsteady, you look like you're going to fall, we should get some physical therapy. Well, physical therapy may not be her goal. Her goal might be to go to someone's wedding. If the goal is to go to somebody to say, oh, my niece is getting married or my granddaughter is getting married in 6 months, then that becomes the goal. Then you create the motivation through what's meaningful and purposeful for that person, and that is different for every single person. And that's usually what I try and kind of tell family members is just to investigate what might be a motivation. And that's the best way to get someone engaged. And someone might not want to be engaged with it. Yeah. Did you guys hear that? It depends on who's delivering the message.
Right.
That's also a very good point. And in family members, it works that way in my family too. Certain people can deliver certain types of messages. Some of our family members can't deliver any messages. We don't want any of them ever relaying important information. So figuring out, like in your family, who would be the best person to have that conversation? Because it's not necessarily, a lot of times with multiple people involved or multiple kids in a family, a lot of times you might have the one kid that's like the doer. I'm going to go in, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to get Mom all that help she needs, I'm going to sign her up for everything. Whereas Mom's like, whoa, like, I don't want all of that. And sometimes you have the one person that can get the person engaged in a conversation to figure out solving that one problem, because they're able to figure out what's meaningful to them through conversation and discourse and engagement. So all of us have our skills, and sometimes figuring out what's going on in a family and picking the right person for the right job is really important when it comes to creating a support system. If helping anybody, this is always good to understand. Medicare and you, if anybody's over 65, and there's a new one out now for 2018. If you're working with anybody and figuring out how to use their Medicare benefits, this is a great guide. And then also looking at open enrollments coming up soon, and we have some local advisors in town through what's a group called SHIBA that would help anybody during open enrollment. If you haven't gone through open enrollment and made changes to a Medicare plan, or you know your mom's had Medicare for 10 years and she hasn't made changes since the day she signed up on it, go talk to the SHIBA advisors and get them to get signed up for what's appropriate. You want to take advantage of all of the systems that we have in place for folks. The other thing, one of the local resources that I rely on a lot is just the library. I love our library here. There are a lot of different textbooks out there and a lot of information about how to provide family caregiving. There are a couple of online sources. I use the Family Caregiver Alliance a lot that's online. There's the Council on Aging online. But there's a lot of different texts out that just will walk you through chapter by chapter of things to look at, or different things. This is just another one that are just activities for family caregivers. So I'm just going to leave this all sitting up here if you guys want to take a look at it, or if you've got questions about further local resources, I'm happy to answer them. So thanks.
Thank you.
For all the latest news in North Central Washington, go to ncwlife.com or find us on Facebook. Got a news tip? Email us at news@ncwlife.com or call 888-2020.